In today's video, I'm gonna learn how to punch needle. So punch needling is a super aesthetic and satisfying craft where you can make these adorable fluffy designs. And while I was watching approximately way too many punch needle YouTube videos, I stumbled upon this video of Miffy on a tote bag. And I am a sucker for crafts that are both cute and functional, so I just had to try making one for myself. And I was thinking, who would be a good character to put on my tote bag? What about Totoro? Get it? Like TOTE-oro? Haha, haha, anyone? Anyways, I feel like a lot of the times these crafts are way harder than they look. So before I dive straight into potentially ruining my tote bag, I think I should do some practice on scrap fabric first. And I was thinking I should start with a fairly simple design for my first project, so I sketched out a little Mario star. I hope this works. Woo! Okay, my needle is not going through the fabric. Oh, there we go. So, wait, why did it just come straight out? No, why isn't it working? And with my first attempt a complete failure, I revisited the tutorials. Okay, so after quite a few hours of experimenting, I think I finally figured it out. Here's how punch needling works. First, you'll want to thread your yarn through the punch needle so it looks like this. Then you want to stretch your fabric onto the embroidery hoop like super tight. And then you stab your needle into the fabric, and on the back side, it makes a little loop. And so if you stab the needle a bunch of times, you'll end up with a little fluffy pattern. And now that I figured out how to actually make stitches, I was ready to try again. But I did realize that a Mario star was a bit ambitious for my very first attempt, so I went for the good old plain yellow circle instead. And I was actually making some solid punch needle progress. I mean, I still wasn't good yet. Like, this is how slow my punching was in real time. But at the very least, I was making progress, and after my first few hours of setup troubles, that felt really good. And ta-da! We now have one yellow circle complete. It almost took me an entire hour just to punch this tiny little thing. But I will say, even though the stitches on the back are kind of messy, the front looks like one fluffy little circle, and that's all that matters, right? And the last optional step is cutting the loops to make the yarn look even fluffier. And since this was just a test run, I figured it'd be a good idea for me to practice my cutting skills too. So here's a before and after of when I cut the loops on the circle. And the best thing is, it's actually so soft IRL, like, can you feel that texture? I guess the answer is no, you cannot feel that texture, but you can see it, you know? Just take my word for it. So now that I figured out how to actually make stitches, I think I'm gonna re-attempt to do the Mario star. And this time I made the star a lot smaller because I feel like the smaller the surface area, the less punching I have to do. And this time the Mario star went a lot smoother. I mean, I still made quite a few mistakes, like some of the stitches dropped in the outline, but from the back it was honestly pretty hard to tell. And I feel like the main reason why the stars still kind of looked weird was more so because my star drawing skills kind of suck, which is admittedly a bit embarrassing since my name is Stella, so I love stars, but I mean, it is vaguely star-shaped. So next up, I'm gonna attempt to fill in the eyes with some black yarn instead. And even though in super time-lapse mode, punch needling can look pretty speedy, it honestly takes a much longer time when you're doing the craft in, real time. Like, it took me almost an hour and a half to finish punching this tiny little star. But this time, I decided I wanted to actually try and finish off the piece. So I cut the star out of the cloth, glued the stitches on the back so it wouldn't get undone, and topped it off with a layer of felt. Well, here we are. Is he perfect? No, in fact, he's not even good, but he was my first attempt, and for that, I am very proud of him. That said, my abilities are definitely not tote-worthy just yet. Like, the yellow fluffy part looks okay, but the eyes are extremely cursed, so I'm definitely gonna have to figure out a better way to do that part next. Okay, it is now day 2, and I'm gonna attempt to make Totoro. No, not the big guy, just the little white one, and on some scrap fabric. Okay, so this time I'm gonna start with the eyes first, because honestly, I feel like that's probably gonna make or break the look of this piece. And I wanted to try out this new technique where you embroider the eyes on the opposite side from the rest of the piece. That way the eye stitches are flat, but the rest of the piece is fluffy. Alright, so this is how the eyes turned out, and I mean, it doesn't look the best, but I think I'm gonna wait until I finish the rest of the piece before I pass true judgment. Since I wanted the eye embroidery to be on the back of the piece, I had to reverse the canvas, so I was now punching on the other side. But boy did I struggle with this Totoro. Like, the first few stitches kept on coming undone, and I had no idea why. Eventually, I switched to a different side and started from there, and I vaguely stabbed my way to a rough outline, but it wasn't great. Unfortunately with this white yarn, the loops are just not staying for some reason, and I have no idea why because I'm literally doing the exact same technique as with the yellow yarn. And the only thing that I've changed is the type of yarn, so I'm thinking maybe if I switch to a different type of yarn, it'll work better. So I set off on a quest to Michael's to find some different types of yarn. And one thing that I realized from my trip is that apparently yarn comes in varying levels of thickness. The white yarn that I bought was size 4, and the yellow yarn was size 3. So it seems like the thinner the better. And as a result, I was trying to find some thickness 2 yarn so it'd be even thinner and therefore, hopefully, even better. But somehow after scouring both Michael's and Joann's, none of these places had any size 2 yarn. So I suppose I will have to turn to Amazon. Luckily, Amazon had my back, so I ordered some size 2 yarn in gray and white for my TOTEoro, as well as some extra goodies to address some other issues I was having. Okay, so today my Amazon package has arrived, and yeah, you can very clearly see that the new gray yarn is much thinner than the old white yarn, so hopefully it'll work better. And yeah, I also ordered some bias tape, which is supposed to help with the grip of the embroidery hoop, so hopefully the fabric will stop falling every time I stab it, you know? Anyhow, looking at this guy again, I think he's a little bit beyond saving. Like, the white yarn wasn't even the only issue, the eyes are pretty cursed too. So I think I want to start fresh, you know, pick a character whose design is a little bit simpler, and I was thinking Miffy-chan would be pretty cute. Oh my god, this is going in so much more smoothly. And this time, punching was a breeze. Well, sort of. With the previous yarns, it literally felt like I was trying to stab a brick every single time. And in comparison, it was now more like stabbing a carrot or something, which is certainly more stabbable, but still not easy. Like, punch needling is unironically kind of a workout. Who needs boxing class when you can just punch a piece of fabric 1,000 times instead, am I right? Alright, well, my Miffy is turning out quite well, but I realized that I need to do the eyes soon, otherwise the white fluff is going to prevent me from doing the reverse embroidery technique. So as part of my Amazon order, I also got a giant pack of embroidery floss, which is kind of just like extra thin yarn. To be honest, I don't know what the actual difference is, but it was cheap, it comes in a lot of colors, and a lot of the YouTubers I watch use this for the eyes instead. So I decided to give it a try, and lo and behold, it worked a lot better. I think because it's thinner, it's better for the fine details. And after approximately 500 more punches, I finally finished Miffy. Alright, well, the eyes certainly got a bit consumed by the punching, but hopefully once we trim it again, we'll be able to see them. And one thing I will note is cutting the yarn took way longer than I expected. It took me almost an hour and a half to just cut this Miffy. Like, you have to make sure you cut every single individual loop, and that takes a lot of time. And then you have to trim it and even it all out and try to make the facial features look good. A lot of the YouTube videos I watched kind of glossed over the cutting bit, but it really also makes a big impact on the end result. Alright, and with that, my little Miffy-chan is done! I will say, we're definitely making progress, but she's still a far cry from the original Miffy tote that I fell in love with, so, you know, we still got a ways to go. But at the very least, I actually feel like the fluffy white punch needle parts look pretty good. Like, the problem is not the punch needling, the problem is everything else. Okay, so I'm definitely feeling better about my skills now, and I think I am ready to level up and actually try making something on my tote bag. I feel like TOTEoro is still a little bit too complicated though, so I was thinking I would try to do like Hello Kitty's face instead. And I'm realizing that part of the reason why my designs suck is because my initial sketches sucked. Like, it's actually really hard to draw on fabric, but then I was like, wait, what if I just sketched it on my iPad first and then traced it onto the fabric? Why didn't I think of that earlier? When you trace the design, you want to make sure the tote bag is inside out so the lines don't appear on the outside. Then you'll want to flip the tote bag right side out so when you embroider the eyes, the facial features get the flat stitches. And then once again, you'll want to flip it inside out so the rest of the design is fluffy when you punch it. So far, all of my designs have kind of used the same needle height, so they're pretty much the same like length of loopiness throughout. But one of the cool things that you could do with punch needling is make these like super 3D designs where like different parts are different heights. So I'm hoping to give that a try in Hello Kitty. To make the 3D effect, you adjust the length of your punch needle. The longer the needle, the bigger the loops are, which makes certain sections appear taller and more 3D. So for the center of the bow, I made my needle as long as possible, length 12, so it would be the tallest part of the design. Then for the sides of the bow, I lowered the needle to length 7, so it'd be a bit shorter. And for Hello Kitty's face, I was planning to make it the shortest part of the tote. Okay, so the good news is I have just enough embroidery floss left to finish the section. The bad news is I do not have any embroidery floss left to do this entire other section. So I'll have to pick the next best color, which is this one. I mean, it's not a perfect match, but oh well. Alright, well, you can kind of see that the center of the bow is a little bit taller than the sides of the bow, but you can definitely see that this part of the bow is completely different colors. That's okay, you know, it is what it is. And for the face of Hello Kitty, I lowered the needle a bit more to length 4, and it was pretty much straightforward punching with the white yarn. Even though the fabric of the scrap cloth I was using and the tote was different, the overall technique was pretty much the same. But this was by far my biggest project yet in terms of size, and honestly, it took me a really long time. Like, I was literally punching for 5 hours. Alright, well, here's my progress, and I think it's coming along pretty well, honestly, but my arm is really freaking sore, so I think I need to give it a break. Like, this is actually a workout, I kid you not. So yesterday I told myself that I would finish filming Hello Kitty at night, but clearly it is now the next day, and I still haven't finished yet, so that's what I'll be working on next. I will say though, even though punch needling is hard in terms of it genuinely requires a lot of arm strength, it's actually not that hard to make the end result look good. Like, even if your stitches are super messy on the backside, so long as there are enough loopies in the front, it ends up looking pretty good. Oh my goodness, it's so fluffy. Definitely needs a bit of trimming though, but the bow is actually really bothering me. And after a bunch of deliberation, I ultimately decided to tear this section out and replace it with a lighter pink, because I had already spent so long on the piece and little imperfection was really bothering me. Oh my god, it looks so cute! Redoing the bow color was totally worth it. Now I'm going to give it a trim, and yeah. I first started by cutting out the areas near the embroidery so you could see the facial features better. And then I had a dilemma. After I started cutting the loops, I kind of felt a moment of regret when I was like, I feel like this looked better before I started cutting. For some reason, instead of it looking fluffy and cute, it just looked a little bit strange, and I was terrified that I had messed up hours and hours of hard work. But once you start cutting, you really can't go back, so I just had to trust the process and power through cutting every single loop on Hello Kitty. And after many hours of cutting, my Hello Kitty bag is finally done. Isn't it cute? And oh my gosh, I freaking love it. Like, just look at how fluffy and 3D the bow looks. It took me forever, but I really feel like you can see the difference once you're done. Good job, me. And to finish off the piece, I glued some cut cloth to the back to prevent the yarn from fraying and waited for it to dry. Disaster strikes again! So apparently when I added the glue on, the marker ink I used for the design bled onto the yarn. No, I'm so sad. I worked on this for so long. But I wasn't ready to give up just yet, so I even tried oxy-cleaning the stain away, but alas, it just couldn't get removed and low-key made it bleed even more. Alright, well, I guess I just have a vaguely crying Hello Kitty tote now. It was so close to being a success, but alas, that's okay. I do think at this point I finally have a pretty good grasp of how punch needling works, so I'm ready to finally attempt making my TOTEoro. So I sketched out a chibi version of TOTEoro onto my iPad and traced it on the inside of my tote bag. This time I used pencil, so there is no risk of bleeding. Hopefully. That would be very concerning. Then I threaded my needle with some embroidery floss and started working on Totoro's cute little eyes and nose. I honestly spent like half an hour on just the eyes because I really made sure that every single stitch looked good, since the eyes really make such a big impact on how the final piece turns out. Oh my god, this is so much better than my first attempt at making Totoro. Like, this was absolutely cursed. Okay, and next up I'm going to be putting in Totoro's fluffy white belly. And I also may have taken a secret trip to Michael's to pick up some more yarn because even though this is my final project, I still wanted to experiment. You see, I was thinking it might be kind of cool to have 2 different textures for Totoro, one for the belly and one for everything else. And for the belly, I wanted it to be super soft and fluffy. But the new size 2 yarn that I bought from Amazon was more on the fuzzy end of the spectrum, like you could kind of see every single individual strand of yarn after you cut it. Whereas the original yellow yarn I used was on the fluffy end of the spectrum, where it kind of just looked like one big fluffy mass, you know what I mean? So I decided to go buy some white yarn that was the same type as the original yellow yarn to get a super fluffy belly texture. But for the gray parts, I used the Amazon yarn so there would be a bit of contrast in the texture. I gotta say, that size 3 yarn is so much harder to work with than the size 2 yarn. Like, man, that white section took me forever. I was literally punching for like 2.5 hours, and then the gray parts took me like 2 minutes or something. Crazy. I gotta say though, even though using the thicker yarn was kind of painful, I feel like it was worth it. Like sometimes when you put in a bit of extra effort, it ends up making the end result that much better. I gotta say, the belly is certainly looking very fluffy and cute and 3D, but oh my god, this is literally taking me forever. It is currently 3 AM, so even though I am feeling pretty good about my progress, I think it is time to go to bed. Alright, well, it's now the next day, and I am feeling refreshed and ready to finish up this Totoro. Next, I decided to work on the arms because I wanted those to be the tallest part of Totoro in terms of fluffiness. So I set the needle length to 12, the longest possible, and punched away. And honestly, punching with the gray arm was a lot smoother than the white belly. Like, it really only took me 30 minutes to finish both of the arms. And you all know the drill by now. It is time to trim. One tip I found helpful is when you cut the yarn, you want to cut at the highest part of the loop, so the two sides of the yarn will be the same length. Because if you're going for that tall, fluffy kind of look, you want to make sure you're maximizing your yarn height, you know? Alright, Totoro is really starting to take shape. You can really see how tall the fluff is. Like, oh my gosh, it's taller than my hand. Okay, and next up we're moving on to Totoro's face. And I also lowered the length of the needle a little bit, so it's now length 9. That way it'll be a little bit less tall than the hand parts. And so the punching continued. Also, one of the other tips that I learned from Hello Kitty was, you want to make sure that you punch really close to the eye embroidery areas to make sure that you don't end up with gaps near the eyes. And lastly for the tail, I lowered the length to 4 because the tail is kind of in the background. He's looking kinda cute and kinda cursed. Hopefully you'll be able to see his eyes and nose a bit better after you do the trimming. And during the cutting stage, I really wanted to emphasize the different 3D heights across Totoro. So after I did a first pass of cutting open all the loops, I made sure to cut the edges of Totoro at a 90-degree angle so he looked super crisp. And I rounded each section so that every single part of the Totoro looked extra 3D. And for a final touch, I stitched in some whiskers. And ta-da! With that, I have finally finished my Totoro! I am honestly so happy with how it turned out. Just look at how freaking soft and fluffy and 3D he looks. It's so good. And I will say, it took me literally forever, but I feel like because I was so patient and precise, that's part of why it turned out so well. And I definitely could not have done this without all of the practice pieces that led up to here, because with every single mistake that I made, I learned something new that I incorporated into my final Totoro. And yeah, overall, I am really glad that I gave punch needling a shot. I hope people have been appreciating that pun throughout this video. But anyways, I had so much fun learning the craft, and even though there were things that were surprising about it, like how genuinely tiring it is, once you get the hang of it and kind of get into the zone, it does become easier. And I do feel like the results are so worth it, so I'd recommend giving it a try if you're interested. Anyhow, if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment down below if you have any suggestions for other crafty ideas for me to try. Hope to see you next time. Bye!